something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop. What's that sound?
During the 1960s and the early 1970s, the United States was simultaneously involved in two very public battles against communism. One was being conducted in space and the other was being fought in Southeast Asia. In Vietnam, it was obvious that a conflict was taking place, but in space it wasn't quite so clear, with NASA promoting it for all mankind. Frank Borman, for one, had no ambiguity on the matter and stated, "Everyone forgets that the Apollo program wasn't a voyage of exploration or scientific discovery. It was a battle in the Cold War, and we were Cold War warriors." Borman was a military man, and he was prepared to risk his life to beat the Soviets in the Cold War. But as he told one reporter, when the science aspect took over, he would want out. Both conflicts would exact the ultimate sacrifice from the ranks of the men who wore the white spacesuits of spaceflight or the camouflage uniforms of the jungle. For some of the Apollo astronauts, the Vietnam War was something that played on their conscience. Gus Grissom was one of those astronauts. Despite the incentive of an early Apollo flight, Grissom was considering his options. His career as an astronaut hadn't quite lived up to his expectations. He had suffered the whispers and accusations behind his back following his Mercury flight. And although the engineering work during Gemini had been rewarding, the culture during the design and manufacture of the Apollo spacecraft didn't lend itself to the same level of involvement. Whereas before, Grissom had felt an integral part of the Gemini's push from design, board to rollout, it was his impression that the contractors, North American, now considered him to just be cargo for their spacecraft and found his inputs an unwanted annoyance. On top of this, there was the tedium of endless meetings and ground tests, not to mention the hours spent in simulators. He also had to endure facing reporters and making public appearances, which he disliked doing. Then there was the Vietnam War. The war was casting its shadow over America's military, and that shadow stretched all the way to the halls of the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston. As the war in Vietnam raged through 1966, Grissom felt the pull of combat over enemy skies once more. It was his duty as an Air Force pilot to serve his country in time of conflict, just like he had done in Korea. With the end of the decade several years away and the moon landings a distant target, Grissom weighed up the possibility of requesting a temporary transfer away from NASA and back to the Air Force. Eventually, the idea of going to Vietnam was dispelled, as described in the book, Gus Grissom, The Lost Astronaut. After talking to another pilot who had flown in Vietnam, who advised Grissom that the conflict had nothing in common with Korea, the astronaut remained in the program. It is also a subject touched upon in the book Deke, which states, in 1966, Gus was looking at his friends who were serving in Vietnam, and he thought he should do his part. He was angry about the situation over there, but those same friends, guys he'd flown with in Korea, told him, "You don't want to be here, it's a bad idea." So he stayed with Apollo. If the war was on the minds of the astronauts, for the military personnel in Vietnam, the Apollo missions were a momentary distraction. As one war veteran of 13 months in Vietnam told me, they may have taken some notice of the Apollo missions, but the day-to-day business of staying alive quickly pushed the achievements from their thoughts. Whether it was barely making it back to safety with a damaged spacecraft or in a shot-up helicopter, Americans were putting their lives on the line for their country, and men were dying on both fronts.
Is there anything scary about a first space flight, even though you've flown many hours in conventional aircraft, jet aircraft?
And a lot of problems that could develop or might develop, and they'll have to be solved. And that's what we're there for. This is our business, to find out if this thing will work for us. I don't think it'll be probably a whole lot worse than the guy that's making a first test flight on a new airplane. Now, I've never done that, so I don't know. I think everybody feels a little apprehensive when they count down. I don't see how you could help but be a little bit excited. But I don't think anybody is, you know, I don't like to use the word scary. I definitely think you're apprehensive and you're considering what's involved there. You're thinking about it. But you know how to handle it and take care of it and do the job.
This is Lance Corporal Buddy Mann from Duval's Bluff. Buddy, how long have you been here?
About 36 days altogether.
Have you seen a lot of action during those 36 days?
Just a little bit, not too much. Little incoming here and there.
We understand back home that this was one of the roughest places in the war. Would you agree with that?
I certainly would. It is. It's pretty bad up here.
Could you tell us about some of your experiences since you've been here?
A lot of artillery incoming rounds and mortars. There's not much you can say about it.
Have you had some pretty close calls?
Not too close, but pretty close. I'm still here.
How long have you been here?
36 days.
In Vietnam?
4 months. 4 months and 2 days.
How much longer you got?
Well, I hope just 8 more months, but maybe 9 to do in Vietnam.
How does this country compare with Duval's Bluff?
No, none whatsoever. I'd like to be back there.
Going to go on a little R&R?
Oh, I'd like that. I'd like to go to Hawaii and meet my wife.
How long have you been married?
About a year and 6 months.
When was the last time you saw your wife?
In June.
She's living back in Duval's Bluff now?
With her mother.
Are you going to get home for Christmas this year?
No. No way.
Will this be your first Christmas away from home?
Right. First one away from home. I've got a little girl, 3 months old, I've never seen before.
What's her name?
Janet Ellen.
You'll be glad to get out of here, huh?
Oh, certainly will.